In this lesson, we're going to look at changing the subject of a formula, but formulas that involve squares and square roots. So we're going to start with squares and then we're going to move on to square roots. These are the inverse functions of each other. We should know that already. So to undo something that's squared, you have to square root. To undo something that's cubed, you have to cube root. And to undo something to the power of 4, we're not really going to look at this. You would fourth root and power 5, fifth root, and so on. And if you started with the function, the square root function, to undo that, you'd have to square things. So what this means is, if we've got a formula like this, x squared equals n, where x is the subject, and that's on the left hand side, that's great, and the right hand side is just get n. To undo this, then what you have to do is you have to do the opposite to the other side. So to get it just to x, the opposite is the square root function. So just if you were adding something on, you would have to do the opposite to the other side, which is take away that. This time, because it's squared, you're doing the opposite, which is square rooting the other side. Let's move on to the next one. Now, the first thing I'm noticing here is that the subject's on the wrong side. So I really want the subject on the left-hand side, so I'm going to switch it. We've done that in the previous lesson, switch right-hand side with left-hand side and left-hand side with right-hand side. Next, I'm noticing that there's an r in front of the q squared. Q squared has been multiplied by the r. That didn't happen before. Now, before this square root, do everything else prior to that. If there's an add next to it, take it away. If there's a multiply, divide it. The last thing you want to do to the subject is square root it. So we'll divide by the r first to get the q squared on its own. And then, to finish off, we'll square root. Now, there's more than one thing over here. That just means you put a big square root over the whole thing. Make sure the square root goes to the bottom and up to the top and then across. Don't have a wee one. Have it all the way down, all the way up and across. Right, a couple more here. Now, you should notice this formula here. If you don't notice it, that's a Pythagoras formula. Now, we're trying to rearrange to b. Now, as I said before, up here we done r, and we divided first to get rid of that, to get the q squared on its own. Here, we've got a plus a squared. We don't want that there. We want the b squared on its own. So you take it away. Do the opposite of add a squared, which is take away a squared. And to finish off, you would square root all of that. Now, make sure your square root tick, goes all the way down and then across the whole thing. That would work for a shorter side in Pythagoras, that formula. Okay, last one here. So, the subject's y, and it's on the left-hand side, but the first thing I'm noticing, I've got this plus x squared. I don't really want that there. Okay, so I want this kind of grouping on its own, and then I'll deal with that. So I'm going to take away the x squared. The next thing I want to do is get the y squared on its own. There are rules to these, and if you follow the kind of ideas here, it should help you solve the problems. So you don't want to multiply this by the 3y, so you want to do the opposite, which is 3w, so you want to divide by 3w. And then to finish off, we need to square root it all. So when you're square rooting it all, you'll notice here, I've put a big tick over the whole thing, right to the bottom, right to the top, and right across, the square root of all of it together. Now let's put this into practice. In a formula you should know, this is the volume of a cylinder formula. And I want to change the subject to r. Okay, so the first thing I've noticed is that the r is on the wrong side, if you like, so I'm just going to rearrange it and put that in the left-hand side, pi r squared h. Also, what we have to be careful of here, we can divide by two things at once. Some people think you can only divide by one thing at once, but we can divide by both of these at once to get r squared on its own. And that's going to look like that. And then let's finish off by square rooting it all. So a big tick over the whole thing. And that formula there would work to get the radius of the cylinder. If you knew the volume and you knew the height, we know what that's 3.14. And then you could put that into the formula and work out the radius. Right, to finish off, let's have a look at the kind of other way. Let's start with the square root and try and get back to x. So the square root function's inverse is squaring. So to get this one, square root of x is equal to n. Then to work out what x is, you've got to do the opposite of the square root to the other side, which is squaring. Now you could apply this. I mean, if the square root of 25 was equal to 5, then we would say 25 is equal to 5 squared. That makes sense. Right, let's look at the next one. So we've got a is equal to 4 square root of q. Now straight away I'm noticing the subject's on the wrong side, so I'm going to rearrange it there. Just put the right hand side to the left hand side to the right hand side. Now the same as before, I want to get rid of this 4 before I do anything. I kind of want to isolate that from that kind of thing there, the square root of q. So I'm going to divide by 4 first. And then to finish off, I'm kind of in this situation here. To get q on its own, you want to square all of the other side. Now, you can write it like that in a bracket. That means you're squaring all of the other side. But you could take it a wee step further, and you're multiplying that by itself. So it would be a over 4 times a over 4. And you could write that as a squared over 16. This would be correct, but that's a better simplified version of the formula. Q equals a squared over 16. Okay, to finish off, a couple of wee complicated ones. Now, here, what we have is we've got a square root and we've got a division here by n, which looks more complicated than it is actually. Now, there's a couple of ways to do this, and once you get good at the techniques, you can do things in different orders if you want. You have to be careful. There's some things you have to do in the correct order, like these things up here. You've got to kind of try and get that on its own. But I mean, like switch sides and then multiply by things. Sometimes you can do these in different orders. So you could switch sides straight away here to get the m on the other side, but I'm going to times up by the n first. For no other reason than that's what I fancy doing. I'm going to times up by the n here, and then I'm going to switch sides. So I'm switching sides at that point because the m wants to be on the left hand side. I'm then going to divide by the 2. So divide by 2. And then I'm going to square the other side. Now again, you could leave it like that there. Make sure you put it in a bracket. But it's nicer to actually kind of times it out. Now the bottom's easy. That's going to be 4. 2 times 2. The top, the square applies to both things. So we've got k squared, n squared there. So be careful with that kind of thing if you get two things squared. Right, last one here. Now, this is an important lesson as well. When there's a square root sign over everything and the subject's inside that, that is the first thing you have to undo. You have to undo all of that before you can get access to these things inside. So that's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to get rid of that square root sign because it's covering up all of my subject and some other details in there. So let's square the other side and get rid of that square root sign. It just makes things much easier. My subject's in the bottom here, so I'm going to multiply by that on the other side because it's divide by w, and do that by timesing by w on the other side. And then to finish off, I'm just going to divide by x squared to get w on its own because w is my subject. So just take that x squared down below and divide by x squared. Now, I would advise you to go back to the start, pause and try these again. These are complicated and a wee bit tricky, okay? So maybe watch it again and pause it and try the examples in your jotter.